There are ways to succeed in business and have longevity or not. And those are the personal choices that people make. If you can do that and you have a modicum of talent, somebody will give you a chance. But you have to at least get that door to open for you. And the way to do that is not going to be through your photography. It's going to be through your personality and how you interact with people.
Hello and welcome to the Photo Forward Podcast, the weekly show where we explore the stories behind some of the greatest photographers and visual storytellers the world over. From their photographic origin stories to finding work-life balance as creative professionals, to how to actually make a living as a photographer, cinematographer, or multimedia creator. We uncover what makes them tick and their shutters click. I'm your host, Ben Brewer. But before we get into today's episode, I want to give a big thanks to everyone who's listening, subscribing, and dropping a rating or review on the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. It means so much to me to really start creating a community around the show. So if you want to hear more inspiring and creative shows like we've been producing, please head over to your podcast app of choice and give Photo Forward a review or a rating to help make this show reach an even larger audience around the world. All right, let's get into the show. Does it feel like you're creating and producing content at a fevered pitch, but never quite getting a stable pool of clients, or like you're constantly reinventing the wheel of your photography or videography business? Well, that means it's probably time to get back to the fundamentals in today's masterclass on making your photography business hum with our guest, BP Miller. BP Miller is a founding partner and senior photojournalist at Chorus Photography. Founded in 2007, Chorus has gone from a single shooter operation in Philadelphia to establishing studios on both coasts with a roster of impressive clientele, including the Drug Information Association, Beasley Broadcasting, Habitat for Humanity, and many others. BP is an award-winning photographer, photojournalist, and speaker whose work has been curated by the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History and published in numerous publications like the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Philadelphia Daily News, Washington Post, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times. BP is an active member of RTDNA, Radio, Television, and Digital News Association, an Edward R. Murrow Awards judge, former Mid-Atlantic chair of the National Press Photographers Association, and a former board member of the Northern Shore course in photojournalism. He can be found speaking across the country about nonprofit photography, as well as photojournalists' rights. In today's episode, BP and I dig in on what it means to be a photographer with integrity for your work, impressing upon your clients the value of the photos and videos that you create, and taking the time for your own mental health as a visual storyteller. There is so much gold in this episode, all delivered with BP's unique perspective on our industry and his telltale voice and humor. As always, show notes and links to other episodes of the Photo Forward podcast can be found online at photoforward.media/podcast. So, without any further ado, let me get out of the way for today's masterclass interview in making the business of your photography hum with BP Miller. BP, welcome to the Photo Forward podcast. So we met at Geek Fest in DC, which is a common thread if you've heard this podcast a couple times. I meet a lot of great photojournalists at that event, rather. For everybody that's kind of maybe not heard of you before, anything like that, why don't we get back into sort of your origins as a photographer? When did you kind of first know that this was where you wanted to take your career?
I've been shooting since I was a kid. So my first camera was a Polaroid, and my parents, had they still be around, would tell you that I would rip through film at an alarming rate. Then moved on to the disc camera, and then I got my first AE1. So I mean, I've been shooting for a long time. It was something that I always loved, but always was kind of like a backseat lover, for lack of a better term, because I mean, I went right into radio from high school. While I was still in high school, I started working in radio. So for me, I was always the guy at the radio station that would be taking pictures that the station would kind of count on to do pictures and stuff like that. And this was before cell phones and Instagram, and you would still take stuff to the photo mat to get developed unless you were doing it yourself. So this goes back a long way. It's just not something that I had necessarily thought about doing for a career. When I retired out of radio, I was talking with my wife about what I wanted to be when I grew up, and this is 15 years ago now, and she said, well, we don't have a mortgage and we don't have kids, and you've talked about opening a studio for years. Like, what are you waiting for? And that's when we started. It was just kind of out of like, okay, like this is something I've always wanted to do. We'll give it a shot, and we're here 15 years later.
And we're going to dive in real deep on starting Chorus and what that meant for you as a photographer. So when you were a kid picking up that Polaroid and all of that, like what can you describe what that was like? I mean, do you have any strong memories of way back when?
I don't have strong memories per se. I mean, I just remember going everywhere with it. And, when you're 8, 9 years old, you're not really thinking about it. It's like, oh, it's a toy. And if I do this and people smile and, I'm interacting with people. I came from a family, my parents had me late in life. So my dad was 42 and my mom was 36. And this is in the early 70s. So that was not the case. It's not was not as normal as it is now. And my sister is 14 years older than I am. So my parents had pretty much already raised a kid. So when I came around and I started really messing with cameras, it was a way for me to interact with people. It was a way for me to kind of get their attention and do stuff. And then as I got older, I started realizing more about storytelling and how you're not just making photos. You're capturing a certain point in time. You're a historian, for lack of a better term. And especially the great thing about social media these days is like, people find photos in old shoeboxes and stuff like that. It was how we did things back then. And for me, it was just one of those things where like, I just loved the power of being able to kind of, I hate to use it because it's such a cliche, but capture that moment in time and be able to go back and look at it and be able to bring those memories right back simply by looking at an image. And I mean, even at a young age, I kind of knew the power of that. Once I got past that point, my voice changed and I was like, I think I'd like to be in radio, and kind of went that way, and photography took a back seat.
So was one of your parents more influential in being the photographer of the house?
No.
I know for me, it was my dad and picked it up from him and kind of passed down that way. Or was it just kind of through osmosis?
Osmosis. My parents were, you have to remember that my parents were born in the early 30s. Like their way of looking at things and trying to deal with a Gen X kid was not easy. So there was very little that we ever had in common. But I mean, I would always walk around. I mean, my parent, especially my mom, I guess, would always, for the Jewish holidays, we would have tons and tons of family and friends over. Brian, don't forget to grab your camera. Oh, okay. And I, run and grab whatever camera, and I still have all those pictures. I still have them in albums, and a lot of the photos that I still have that I made all those years ago are of images of family members that have long since passed. So it's a nice feeling to look at those and know that not only do we have them, but I made them, and so there is a certain level with that.
Yeah, I mean it is a beautiful sentiment. I mean, I'm saying that as someone who, right, on the other side of the room here, I have a shoebox full of albums that I am currently digitizing of the family photo albums that, if not now, they may be lost to history. And so there's something special about having that.
Well, it's interesting. I was just having this conversation with somebody not long ago, and we always talk about printing off images to our clients and friends and when I teach. And I say, you don't have to print off every picture that you take. Obviously in this day and age, like you don't have to print off pictures of the frittata that you had at breakfast this morning. But if there are those images that mean something to you, like take those 10 or 20 images a month, print them off and put them in a shoebox somewhere. Because, how many people remember 3.5-inch discs? Who has the ability to get into them now? Almost nobody. So it's the same concept here where it's like, it's so easy to print off images. Make sure that you do that, because it's not necessarily for you. It's for the future. It's for your family members to look back and be like, oh, look at Uncle Ben or look at Uncle Brian, all this kind of stuff. That's what we're doing, ultimately.
Amen, brother. No argument here. So a pivot to radio is kind of a big shift. I mean, that seems like you described yourself as sort of a visual person growing up as a kid, camera always with you. And then radio, our worlds don't often interact in I'll say positive ways, or it's different ways. Tell me about what your mindset was moving into radio.
My voice changed. It honestly was something very as simple as that. I had grown up listening to the radio. Obviously, I mean, back then that's all you had. There was no Spotify. There was no iTunes. You listen to the radio if you wanted to listen to music. And I had, being the typical Gen X kid, had this huge Sony boombox, and I would sit there and practice hitting the post. And hitting the post is you'll hear a DJ speak over the music and then automatically just stop right when the person starts to sing, and that's called hitting the post. So I would sit there and practice doing this, and my sister was a mobile DJ, and I loved music. I had loved music my entire life. And just kind of said, you know what, I think this is what I want to do. I was always in acting. I was always into theater and all that type of stuff. So for me, it was almost an extension of that. Like you're becoming a different person for 4 or 5 hours a day. And it was something that I was good at. Unfortunately, I came into radio kind of in like the late 80s, early 90s when something called deregulation had happened and really changed the industry, and not for the better. And it's kind of why you have radio the way it is now, which is, so commercial heavy and so sanitized, and very seldom do you come across a radio station anymore across the U.S. where it's not just about the music, it's about the person that is introducing it. It's the DJ, it's the talent. And it's just something that I always had wanted to be in some form or fashion. And, as much as I love photography, music and theater and acting came secondary to me. Like it was second nature to me, I should say. It was just something that was always there. So it seemed like the logical thing for me to do. And I did love my time in it. And I still work very much with radio, just not in it. We're the photographers for a station here in Philadelphia and for a cluster, and we do all of their stuff. As a matter of fact, I'm leaving tomorrow for 3 days for a shoot up in the mountains of Pennsylvania for a thing called the Cardboard Classic. And it's run by this radio station, and the morning show has been #1 in Philadelphia for 15 years. So, and I've known these guys for a while. I know a lot of the radio personalities in Philadelphia still. And I always joke around that I get to mix my first love and my true love. So my first love is radio, but my true love is photography. And very seldom do you actually get to live with both of them. I'm very lucky. I hate to use the term blessed, but I'm definitely lucky that I get to do what I do and get to work not only in an industry that I love, but an industry that I used to love very much.
What do you think being in radio kind of prepared you for a career in photography, or kind of how did you see that shaping who you are? Because it is a unique story that you've been through, a unique perspective. What do you think that's done for your photography?
It's helped me draw people out. You learn really early on some interview skills on how to pull people out of their shell, or how to pull information out that they may not be willing to necessarily part with easily, especially when you're working and you're interviewing band members, whether it's, Fry and Henley from the Eagles, who were notoriously difficult to interview, to Roger Waters, to, all these people. It's like you want to try and have a conversation with them, but they're also on their guard because they're viewing us as the media. So in that, there's your first commonality, is that we're both viewed as media people, and media people aren't always to be trusted. It's not a new thing. It's been around forever. So I found that the interview skills that I learned really, really helped me when I pivoted over to photojournalism, because I'm able to talk to people and I'm able to kind of put them at ease. So when I'm trying, especially if I'm doing portraiture or if I'm working with this particular subject, I really get a chance to kind of pull them out of their shell a little bit. And after a while, they forget that we're actually doing a photo shoot. So I think all those years of just interviewing and knowing how to get in somebody's head without them realizing that I'm in their head has tremendously helped.
What do you think you attribute that to? What kind of I don't know, techniques is the strong word, but like what goes through your mind as you're trying to build that rapport? So I kind of asked this because another photographer that's come on the show, Nate Ryan, who's photographer for 89.3 The Current here in the Twin Cities, he said a very similar thing. Like he may only have a few minutes to photograph some artist, and trying to pull out that, or trying to build that rapport, that relationship, to draw out that story in a short amount of time. What kind of goes through your head as you're trying to, like you said, build a relationship to get something out of them that they might not otherwise think to give?
It's honestly just making a connection as a human. It always comes back down to that. Is just like, I'll do research before we work with people. I will do research on them and see how they are to work with, what their public personality looks like, news stories that it's always about show. Like, in radio, it was always about show prep. It was you always had to prep your show before you did anything. Like if you were going to do music news or birthdays or whatever, there's always a lot of prep. Photography is no different, especially when you're working with people. And this is one of the things that I learned from Jerry Avenham. I've done master's classes with him, and he's one of my favorite portrait photographers. I mean, he just does amazing work. And I remember him saying years ago, this is probably 12 years ago, you just have to make a connection as a person to draw them out. It's not any more difficult than that. So sometimes it's, hey, how you doing? What's going on? I'm Brian. I'm BP, however, people refer to me. And I know you're staying here in town. How's it going so far? And you just start talking to them as them. We get to work with a lot of celebrities because I don't care who any of them are. Like I kind of see them as people. So it has helped me tremendously in my career to just treat everybody the same. I learned that from Jerry, but I also learned that from, do you know the actor Seth Green?
Yeah.
So Seth and I had grown up together, and unfortunately, we had a falling out a number of years ago. And it was my fault. I mean, completely my fault. But I lived with him in L.A. for a short time, and I remember being out to dinner with him and like a bunch of other celebrities, and they were going around and just asking everybody at the table for their autograph, and they came to me. And I looked at him and he looked at me. He's like, yeah, do it. And so someone's walking around with my autograph. But the reason that I tell that story is Seth said something to me years and years ago that really just kind of have stuck with me. And it was just an offhand comment. And he said, I don't know where my career is going to go, but do me a favor. Like, if you ever meet people that you think are famous, just treat them like you would anybody else. We're really not that different. And I don't know what had caused that utterance. I don't know if something had happened, if it was an audition or somebody had said something to him, but it has stuck with me all these years. And then I kind of mixed that with something that a friend of mine who is in AA in recovery had said, you got to be nice to every person you meet because you never know who your next sponsor is going to be. And there was just such between what Seth had said and what my other friend had said, it just kind of stuck with me. And that's how I've always just, ever since we opened Chorus, I just treat people the way that I would want to be treated. And it just gets me further than I think anything else. It's trying without trying. It's just being me. It's being a good human being.
Absolutely. All right. So how many years did you work in radio then before, as we're going to get into Chorus a bit here? So
I started as an intern in 88. And I got out of working radio full time in like 2001, 2002. And then I worked in the family business for a while, which I hated, was just not my scene at all. And I had gone to work. This is kind of where the impetus for Chorus came around. I was really trying to figure out how to get into the photography and video game, because when we first opened, we were doing photography, video, and voiceover. That's where the name Chorus comes from. We were offering a chorus of services. And we quickly threw out video because I can storyboard and I can direct, but shooting video is a completely different discipline than shooting stills. And it's just something I never had a knack for. So we ended up actually partnering up with a video partner here in Philadelphia that does our video and we do their stills. And then I went to work for this one company, and they were trying to figure out, it was a video production company. And they were trying to figure out how to stay busy in the slow times, which is obviously summer and winter for shooters. And I had seen the change that was happening in radio. MySpace was the really big thing at this point. And websites were starting to become more and more prevalent. And I realized that radio stations were going to need more than just the on-air talent. They were going to need content for social media at what it was at that point, and for their websites. And I said, you know what, I think I can get us a sit down with the station that I do all the photography for now. I said, I think if we pitch this to them, we can really kind of have great partnership. And the guy who owned it, his ex-wife was still part of the organization, and we were constantly just at loggerheads, like constantly fighting. And sure enough, we bring on the radio station as a client, and they couldn't afford to pay, miraculously, they couldn't afford to pay me anymore. They figured out how to fix it, and, they no longer needed me. And that's when I started Chorus. I started Chorus for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't because I wanted to, be this, well-known photographer or photojournalist or whatever. I wanted to steal this idiot's clients away because I was so pissed off. So if you're listening to this, emotion is not a great reason to open up a business. I got lucky. I opened it for the wrong reasons, but we've been able to stay in business because of other, choices that I've made, especially as I've gotten older and not as emotional. But that's how Chorus came around. It was just one of those things where I'm like, you know what, I can do this better than this guy can. And I believe in myself, and, my wife believed in me, and my friends believed in me, and my family to an extent. And Chorus was born unofficially in 06 and officially in 07.
Well, you may have started it for the wrong reasons, but you may have kind of seen around the corner of where photography was going to be seen, where content was going to be produced, and kind of you may have seen something before it was there.
I don't know if it was necessarily that. I mean, it's a part of it. Part of it is just business sense. I'm the son of a salesman, so like I grew up watching my father sell. A lot of it is just being able to read the room. And see what's coming down. I mean, I think it's a little more difficult to do now because we're just in such a different time than we were even 15 years ago. I looked at an industry that I knew really well and saw the changes that were coming and kind of put two and two together. But had it not been that industry, I don't know whether I would have seen how important content was going to become in the social media age. I don't know if I'm sure some people saw that coming, but I don't want to come off like this great soothsayer. It was just something that I knew about and another thing that I knew about and kind of put two and two together.
Right.
Sometimes it's luck. Sometimes just like photography, sometimes it's luck. It's a little bit of skill coupled with a little bit of luck.
Yeah, I think, and you were close enough to that industry that you had seen enough, and sure enough, it happened to go that way in just about every industry. But so you saw it in that narrow example and kind of extended it.
I tried, and the fact that it took me, another 6 or 7 years to get the radio station back, but we've been with them now since 2013. So, a lot of that was hard work. That's the key thing is it's getting in the door is one thing, staying on the other side of the door is another, and that's the key thing. And that's where the hard work kind of comes into play.
You described the early days of Chorus as you offered a lot of different services. I'm guessing that was a challenge. That sort of, it was tough to position yourself as someone who did a little bit of everything. How did you sort of shape that message, shape that brand of what Chorus was, both from the early days and into today?
Well, the funny thing is I really thought the voiceover was what was going to drag us forward because that's what I knew. That's, I'd been voicing commercials and radio stations, for years and knew what I was doing, and I was fairly decent at it. And I thought for sure, I'm like, all right, we'll add on photography and video, but I think voiceover is probably going to be what's going to drag us forward. And it wasn't. It was the photography. If anything, the voiceover stuff was the least amount of anything that we did. And I don't know if it's just because I didn't put as much of a focus on it, or if I'd just kind of been burned out from it. I had been focusing more on the photography, but a lot of it kind of came around from just networking with people and talking with people. And this is one of those things that I talk about regularly. You know, you can be a great photographer, but if you're not a good person, people aren't going to want to work with you. So people are way more willing to work with somebody, even if they're not as good, but if they are good to deal with. And that's what's, honest to God, that's what has dragged us forward from 2006 on. It always comes back to the same thing. Be a good person. Like, you'll have so much more opportunities afforded to you if you're a decent person, as opposed to if you're a raging prick that thinks they are everything. And it's the God's honest truth. And it's something that has been said to me over the years, and it's something that I talk about constantly over the years. You know, you can be the best photographer in the world, but if you're an ass, people aren't going to want to deal with you. And now, especially more than ever, there are way more photographers than there have ever been. And somebody else will get that job. So that's what really has made us work. It's just going out and meeting people and getting them to give us a chance. And when they gave us a chance, they hired us again and then again, and then they told their friends. And it's a 15-year overnight success story.
Yes, that is the classic thing. Do you think you picked up some of that from your dad as a salesman? Yeah. Go on a little bit on that.
Oh, absolutely. Not even a question. My father worked in the carpet business, and he was an old school sales guy. Like, this is a guy that always rolled in with 30 jokes, and how he was at home and how he was out on the road were always two different people. When he came home, he was quiet. He was reserved. He never really said much. He's almost like a stand-up comic. Almost any stand-up comic that I know, is brilliant on stage, and you get them home and they're just this dysfunctional, quiet mess. And it's the same. It was the same thing with my dad. He would get out there, and he was a brilliant salesman because he would just talk with people and he would joke with them and ask about their family and ask about this. And business always was the forefront of his mind, but it was always secondary in the conversation. I think one of the things that he's always said that has stuck with me and has kind of helped how we've run the business is you sell the sizzle, not the steak. And that's it's just a saying that he had as long as I can remember. And it's something that I've picked up, which is, I'm a photographer, but there are a lot of other photographers out there. That's the steak. What's the sizzle? And the sizzle is like a fun experience. Like, people don't like having their photo taken. Like, I don't like having my photo taken. That's why I joke around. That's why I became a photographer. If the camera's in my hand, you can't take my picture. It's the same thing with selling the sizzle, not the steak. You have to learn how to sell yourself. If you can do that and you have a modicum of talent, somebody will give you a chance. But you have to at least get that door to open for you. And the way to do that is not going to be through your photography. It's going to be through your personality and how you interact with people. So that's everything that he did as a salesman absolutely has helped me.
And that's something we don't necessarily think about as photographers. Like, there's this sort of the classic artist that says, no, my work should speak for itself. But, it's a different world now. I think you do have to speak for yourself.
I think there's a difference between surviving and thriving. So there's this photojournalist here in Philadelphia that I have just gone head to head with a number of times over the years. He's been fired from like almost every major newspaper on the East Coast, and he's just a miserable excuse for a human being. And we run into these different circles all the time, and he keeps getting all these different jobs, but he can't keep the jobs. And I get why. And that's the thing. Like, it's fine if you're cool living paycheck to paycheck, and I don't know if he does or not, but I'm just using that as a throwaway. If you want to live and wonder where your next check's coming from, that's certainly a way to live. I choose not to do that. I enjoy my life. I enjoy going away with my wife. I enjoy spending time with friends and going places. I want to know that I've got other jobs lined up besides the one in front of me. And that's the key to everything. So there are ways to succeed in business and have longevity or not. And those are the personal choices that people make. And I get, I'm the first person to admit, I'm not everybody's cup of tea because I'm very straightforward. You never have to worry about where you stand with me because I don't have a problem telling you. And it's also probably the reason that I could never work in the corporate world because I like telling people to go F themselves way too much. And, but that's who I am. It's unapologetically who I am. So I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea either. However, I do try to go to great lengths to make people feel at ease because A, I'm going to get better images, but B, there's more of a chance that I'm going to get hired by them, or they're going to refer us out to other people. And that's everything. Like, that's how you stay in business. So everything ties in, even if it doesn't seem like it does. Everything that you do as a person, as a human being, as a business owner, they all tie in some form or fashion. And it's trying to figure out how that roadmap looks. And it's different for every person. So I can tell you what's worked for me, but it may not work for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of the classic expression, it's not enough to be great. It's not enough to be different. You have to be great and be different.
Yeah, and I think even great sometimes is a stretch. I think you just have to be. I don't know if you want to put a qualifier at the end of it. Sometimes just being gets you further and allows you to do more in life than trying to achieve what people see as greatness, because everybody's version of greatness varies. What my version of what greatness is versus yours versus, Ryan's or any of these other people, we've all got a different way of looking at things. So, when we do portfolio reviews, I always say the same thing. Listen to what I have to say, take what makes sense to you and throw all the rest of it out, because it's only what's worked for me. If you get anything out of this review, great. And if you only get bits of it, that's fine. If it helps you, then mission accomplished. So I hate using words like great or epic or anything like that, because it's subjective.
So on that topic, one of the things that I saw you had posted sort of recently is talking about of what expectations for your work and expectations of your career are, and what it means to set, real and manageable expectations in that. What do you think has been sort of your philosophy and mindset about the expectations for your work as a photographer?
As from my standpoint or from the client standpoint?
For yours.
I think expectations are the biggest thing that we can do as photographers and photojournalists is educate the client. I think that's not something that we as an industry do well. I think that, managing expectations is the same no matter what industry you're in. You always have to set a certain level of expectation for a client. And, sometimes that means brutal honesty. Sometimes that means, just doing whatever they want you to do because they're not going to listen otherwise. So it's a very fine line. I don't know if I've given that a lot of thought. I think every situation is different. So I approach it, somewhat generically and then adjust on the fly as needed. But in this day and age, in the social media age, social media has messed up so much of our lives in good and bad ways. It's absolutely a double-edged sword. But everybody is an expert now, except they're not. So I forget. Wait, I there was this one meme. It wasn't even a meme. It was a comic, and I think it may have come out of the Post, where a guy sitting in front of the computer, he goes, "Honey, this is so strange. All my friends on Facebook that were constitutional experts 2 weeks ago are now experts in something to do with the coronavirus." It's like everybody's an expert except they're not, and I'm just as much. I'll get tagged for that as well. We all think we know everything because we live in the times where it's so simple to bring up information. The problem is not your clients don't always understand that. I was just having a conversation with a wedding client that we're doing, and we don't do a ton of weddings. We do maybe 2 or 3 a year at best. And I happen to be friends with these people, and we're doing their engagement session in a couple weeks. And she said, well, how about 1 o'clock in the afternoon? Now, that's the worst time of day to shoot. I know that's the worst time of day to shoot, but she didn't. She was thinking there's lots of sunlight. And I said, well, ideally for what we're trying to do, later afternoon, early evening is better once the sun's going down. And this is why, you start explaining how the sun is, directly above you and everybody gets raccoon eyes. And she said, that's why you're the pro. And that's the thing. Everybody thinks that they understand something about photography. Well, how hard is it? You're just pressing a button. Yes, that's all I'm doing. Absolutely. You got me. That's all it is. So if you educate and inform the client in a way that they understand and say, look, I understand where you're coming from. I'm happy to do it your way, but let me do it my way also. And then you can choose which one. And something that simple makes all the difference. And that's the difference between losing a client and retaining them and educating them. We have to educate. We can't just go in and work. We have to do more than that.
So as a part of working at Chorus and creating it, you know, there's obviously positives and negatives to being your own business. Tell me a little bit about, you know, some of those. I mean, both the good and the bad, because a lot of people are considering, you know, maybe they're just getting started in their career and they're considering freelance or starting a business, or considering going the route of staff or working for a marketing agency or something. So what are things people should kind of know going in, good and bad, about being your own business?
Well, first thing, in business or photography?
Ooh, that's a great question. Let's go into just photography right now and get into business as well.
Okay, so the first thing you need to realize is if you don't have the money to go out and properly open your business and get the tools that you need to do your business, then don't go into business. You can't bitch when a lens costs X amount of dollars, because that's what you need to do your job. I'm just amazed when people say, well, you know, I really want to be a photographer, but, you know, I can't afford the gear. Well, then if you can't afford the gear, then it's fine if you want to become a photographer, but then you got to work at it slowly. You can't just look. I got lucky when we opened Chorus. I was in a good place financially. My wife was in a good place financially. Like we were able to do what not everybody can, which is stop and build up a business naturally, because we had made some really sound financial decisions leading up, you know, prior to that. And I understand not everybody can do that, but you know, it's one of those situations where I'm like, this is an expensive hobby. Like, that's what I always tell people. I'm like, it's an expensive hobby if you're going to do it right. And you can't just have one camera body. You need at least two. Why? Well, what happens if one of your cameras breaks? What are you going to do? Oh, I didn't think about that. What happens if you drop the one lens you have on a shoot? I didn't think about that. These are the things you have to think about. You know, you need insurance. You need to be incorporated. You need to, you know, especially if you do a lot of event photography, venues are constantly asking for additionally insured certificates. You can't, you need insurance to do that. And, you know, there's just so many different things when it comes to opening up. The biggest thing, and this is something they never teach you in school, you need to learn how to sell yourself. Because photography, actually, the act of shooting and making images is the smallest amount of your day-to-day work. It's the smallest amount of your day-to-day work. You're an office manager, you're an accountant, you're a business manager, you're a banker, you're all these things in addition to being a photographer. But the act of actually pressing the shutter is the smallest amount of what you do on a day-to-day basis. So you have to be willing, and you have to have some level of understanding of going into business for yourself and what that entails. If you don't have insurance, health insurance, you know, if you're not married or, you know, on somebody else's health insurance, that's a big thing. If you don't have insurance on your gear and somebody steals it out of your car, or, you know, worst case scenario, mugs you, and it happens all the time. You need to take certain steps just to protect yourself. And then once you start getting into hiring people, we were open, I guess, about 3 or 4 years before we hired our first photographer, Megan, who is still with us 10 years later. You know, you have to understand, and the biggest thing that I had a hard time with was letting go of them not shooting like me. You know, it's one of those like, well, this is how we've gotten as far as we've gotten, so I'm assuming this is what our clients want, and this is what we have to do. It took me a while to get into that mode of being okay with people not shooting the way that I do, or not doing things the way that I do, because no one's going to do things the way that I do any more than I'm going to do them the way they do. I can't see through their eyes. They can't see through mine. So there is a level of giving up that control that was really, really, really tough. And then as we added people, just making sure that they kind of saw the vision, you know, because it's not BP Miller Photography. It's not Brian Miller Photography. It's Chorus Photography. And I wanted a company name rather than just my name, because I was hoping that we would grow big enough where it would be more than just me. And it certainly helps. I mean, it absolutely helps to have a name of a company that's not yours, you know, that's not your own. The further in that you get, you know, just letting go of things that you're afraid of. Something that I learned really early on was being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it's something that I say all the time. You have to stretch your comfort zone. and it's going to go against every fiber of your being. And sometimes it's going to fail, and that's okay. Failure is actually a good thing. You need to have your ass handed to you a few times in order to get better and in order to move forward and figure out how the pieces move on the board in front of you. And failure is a very big part of that. People are afraid to fail, and they shouldn't.
I'd love to have you go in a little bit more on that. Do you have a sort of favorite failure of yours that you'd be willing to share?
Oh my God, every day. I mean, from a photographer standpoint, and I apologize for that. I don't know if people normally curse on your show or not, but shitting the bed with an image like that you thought was going to be amazing. I do that at least once a week. Like you make this shot, you click the shutter, and you're like, oh man, that's going to be awesome. And you look at the back of the camera and it looks great, and then you get it up on your 28-inch monitor and it looks like crap or it's out of focus, and you're like, I thought I had that, man. Oh, that sucks. From a failure standpoint, I mean, from a larger perspective, losing clients that I thought were totally in our corner. You have to, and this goes back to, you have to be willing to take risks in business. And I've taken a number of risks over the years, most recently with two of our largest clients that made up a large amount of our income last year, and I was ready to walk away. We were willing to walk away because we were standing up for what was right. Now, both of them we ended up retaining, but I could have just as easily lost that business for our business. And that would have meant less shoot time for everybody, less jobs for everybody to work on. So like the decisions that I make as a business owner now not only affect myself and my wife, but it affects our employees as well. So, the biggest, I think, let me see here. The biggest failure going back was getting unnecessarily cocky with a client because I misunderstood our relationship. And was joking around as I do with my friends, and we ended up losing the client. So, it wasn't the biggest client, it wasn't the smallest client, but I felt awful because I had misread the cards on my relationship with this person, and it happens. A lot of our clients become our friends because, kind of going back to what I initially said, being a good person, and you become friendly with these people and you start working with them all the time. But sometimes that'll come back to bite you in the ass. It's happened with a lot of our event clients where we become friendly, and then they feel that they can start texting me at 10 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night and start asking me these ridiculous questions that can absolutely wait until the next business day. I actually went through my Facebook and cut out 90% of our clients from that because one of them threw something back in my face. I was out having dinner with my wife one night, and they're like, how do you have time to do this but not this? And I'm like, that's none of your damn business. Like, I'm entitled to have a life outside of working hours, and you don't get to tell me that. The one client that we lost, it was just a lot of joking around, and I took it a step too far, and it wasn't in any way meant to be insulting, but that's how they took it. And, you learn the hard way sometimes.
Well, that's a perfect segue into something that I think is really critical, especially when you are the one owning the business, the one running the show. What is work-life balance to you, and does it exist?
Yes, I am a huge proponent of work-life balance. My wife, we're very similar. We're both type A people, and she is way smarter than I am, and is way more corporate minded. And when we first started dating, she would spend ridiculous hours at work and then come home and eat something and start working again. And I'm like, no, you're not getting paid nearly enough to do that. I'm sorry. It's not your business. And you have to figure out whether or not you want to spend time with me. And this is while we were still dating. And I said, you have to either find some work-life balance or we need to break up. And she'll tell you to this day, if I brought her into the studio right now, she would tell you it was one of the best things that I ever explained to her, because she was putting so much time into an organization where she was fairly low ranked and wasn't making nearly what she should have been. And it just happened to be a cheap company that she was working for. And we absolutely do a work-life balance, and it's something that I instill in all of our shooters as well. Take time, like you have to, because if you don't, you're going to burn out. You're not doing anybody any favors if you don't take time off. And I know a lot of people's response to that is, well, I can't afford to. You can't afford not to either, because you can't discount the mental restorative powers of a day off, or taking some time with your better half, or taking it to, just going on a long weekend or something, hopping in a car and driving around for 3 hours just to clear your head. It's just as important as insurance or the right gear or being incorporated. Like, that work-life balance is everything. And no matter how hard you work, you have to find it, because next thing you know, you're going to be 48 years old looking back and going, where the hell did the time go? And at least I can look back on the last 15 years at a bare minimum and know that I made time for my friends and my family and my wife and my business, and was still able to make it all work together.
Well, that's some pretty good advice, I think. I think we get pushed into this hustle culture, especially as people in the photojournalism world, and it's a little dog eat dog, and you gotta push to get it. But if you don't take some time for yourself, you might just end up burnt out, just like you were saying there.
Oh, it's not might, you will be. I mean, I've seen a lot of my friends burn out and are trying, like, sometimes it's too late. You realize that you need that work-life balance too late, and it's tough to watch sometimes. For at least from my standpoint, especially people that I care about.
All right. So as we alluded to earlier, we kind of met at GeekFest in DC, community of photojournalists before. Tell me a little bit about what kind of having a community of photographers has meant for you, you personally.
It's everything. I one of the things that I've said, I don't even remember when I started saying it, but I'm like, photojournalists are solitary pack animals. And like, we have to work together in some form or fashion, but in general, we're loners. We kind of go off and do our own thing, and, our own assignments. And I don't like that I said it earlier. I don't like that photographer. I don't like this photographer. We're all we have. Like, nobody understands what we do better than us. People don't understand the life of a photographer or of a photojournalist. They don't understand the sometimes we're taking horrifying images of things that stick with us. Someone may see it in passing on social media or whatever, but a lot of it sticks with us. When someone's done dirty by either a client or another photographer, we all feel it. So I'm a huge proponent of networking among photographers, whatever term you want to use, wherever you are in the industry. I'm a firm believer that we need each other, that we should be networking more. We should have louder voices than we do. I'm personally tired of walking into someplace with my press credentials on and getting booed at simply because I've got press credentials on. That doesn't tell anybody who I am. It just says what I do. You don't know what my political leanings are. You don't know how I live my life. But all of us, we understand each other, and we spend more time fighting and infighting than we do anything else. And yeah, you have these gatherings that happen throughout the year. But then when you look online, there's a lot of back chatter. There's a lot of backbiting and stuff like that. And I think now more than ever, it's really important for us to kind of come together and gel as a community, and not just in words, but in actions. And I think that's something that's absolutely lacking. I try really hard to network with as many photographers and photojournalists as I can, because I think it's important. You never know when somebody's looking for something in another state. I see it all the time. Hey, I'm looking for a photographer in Philly, or I'm looking for a photographer in the Twins. Oh, great. I know Ben, or I know this one, or I know that one. Let me make a call for you. It's simple. There's not as much of that going on. I will tell you, the one group that does it really well, and I don't know if you know Jamie Rose, but
I don't.
Jamie was so Jamie runs Memento workshops out in Oregon, Washington State. I always forget, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. I always forget where she is. She was part of the DC crowd and covered DC for the New York Times for a number of years. And she runs these Memento workshops, and it's more for nonprofit photography. And Jamie and I are really good friends. But the one thing that Jamie does is uplifts other photographers. It's one of the things that I love about her more than anything else. Every Friday on her personal Facebook page, she puts up, what's the best thing that happened to you this week? Pictures encouraged. It always says that. Pictures encouraged. For the alumni of the workshops, her and Chris's workshops, there's a page, and we all talk and we interact. And if somebody's coming through Philly and needs a place to stay, someone will reach out to me. I love that. I love when that happens. It's one of the things that I absolutely love about her and the way that she does things and how she runs her business. She is always lifting other photographers up, and I wish that we would see more of that rather than the constant backfighting and this and that and the other thing. It doesn't get us anywhere, and it's petty. It's BS.
It is, yeah. And how do we get away from that sort of dog eat dog mentality, you think, as photographers, as photojournalists? Because there are a finite number of assignments out there, and it seems
they're not, though. That's the thing, is that there is enough work out there for everybody if you're good at your job. And that's, in order to make it as a freelancer, you have to do everything. If you're just going to stay in news and you're just going to be a photojournalist, yeah, you're going to have a rough go, because it is absolutely a changing industry, which is why we do everything. Like, weddings I hate, I'll do a couple a year and that's it. But our shooters that work for us love doing them, so they're doing them. And that's fine. Like, I'm happy to source that work for them. But you have to, there is more than enough business out there for everybody. Look, I've been in business, this is our 15th year, going into our 15th year. You're not going to get every job that rolls through the door, and you have to know that. Like, you're not going to score every job. But you know what? For every job that you don't get, there's another one out there. And it's just a matter of time. You have to have faith in yourself and your work. I send a ton of work to other photographers throughout the year that we can't handle. Mm-hmm. That's how it's done. Like, if you want to be the person, there's nothing that I can ever do or say that's ever going to change your mind in that. If that's how you are as a person on a day-to-day basis, and I'm the best and I don't work for other people and blah, 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 and fine, great, go your own way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I will easily send out, last year alone, I probably sent out 30 or 35 jobs to other shooters because we couldn't take them. We were already booked, or it was below our budget, because obviously, sure, when you're around long enough, you get to call the ball a little bit more with your budget and what you're willing to do and what you're not. I don't have a problem doing it. And I'll say, hey, you know what? This other guy, I know what their rates look like. I think this is going to be perfect for, this person, or that person will be good. Let me give you their information. Let me make sure they're available, and I'll connect you. And I'm not getting anything out of that other than helping a friend. And that's okay. I don't need a finder's fee. I don't need to constantly be making money. It always comes back down to the same thing for me. Just try to be a good person. And if you are, things will come to you. It really is that simple.
All right. I'm going to push back just a little bit on part of that.
Okay.
Because I honestly just have a question on this. Because what you kind of said there is a little bit counter to what I've heard in a lot of sort of the photo industry world, which is to say that, you kind of said you have to do a little bit of everything. Well, it seems like if you're not known for anything, you're not the person that comes to mind when you say
known to who though?
That's a good question.
That's the question. To other photographers or to the clients?
Right. So I think there's two sides.
I don't care what other photographers think of me. I've never cared what other photographers outside of my friends. I don't care because they're not paying me. The clients are. So for me, how am I staying in business? Is it based off of what other photographers think of me, or the amount of business that I'm bringing through the door? And to stay busy and to stay in business. That's what matters,
I guess I'm kind of coming at it from the other side of terms of like a marketing perspective. It's like, all right, if you take on a little bit of everything, a little bit of wedding, a little bit of event, a little bit of video, a little bit of everything, then it kind of seems like if somebody comes to your website, they're going to say, well, I guess they do a little bit of everything, but I don't know if they're going to be able to do my thing.
And that's when they call and we talk. Look, you're not going to be all things to all people. You can't be. And you're not I'm not going to get every commercial job that rolls through. I'm not going to get every, wedding or mitzvah or event. Mm-hmm. We do a ton of event. We do a ton of nonprofit. We happen to be a company that has a lot of different photographers working for it that are good at different things. Mm-hmm. So in a situation like this, if I'm not good at it, or one of our photographers isn't good at it, guess what? I know somebody that is. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't call that person first and they called me, then either they didn't know about the other person, maybe they didn't like the other person. I've gotten a lot of jobs over the years here in Philadelphia because they're like, you know what, he was a great photographer, but he was a pain in the ass to work with. And it always comes back down to that. It always comes back down. So I can't worry about what the industry thinks, because the industry's not paying my bills. Our clients are. And it kind of goes hand in hand with, when educating clients and stuff like that. Sometimes the clients educate you as well. When we're going through edits and stuff like that, the pictures that I would choose versus the pictures that our clients would choose, 90% of the time are never the same ones. You know why? Because we're looking at them differently. I'm looking at them from an industry standpoint. Are they in focus? Are they composed correctly? Is everything the way it should be? They're looking at it from their heart. Oh, that's an awesome picture. They don't care about if it's exposed properly. They don't care if they look at it and they like it. That's all they know. And that's what they want to use. So we get caught up as an industry on being like, well, it's got to be this way. It's got to be this way. No, those rules have kind of gone out the door a little bit. So you can either adjust and go with it or not. And you can either succeed or fail. It's entirely up to you. But the photography aspect of it, again, is only going to be a small part of that. You have to, if you're not able to sell yourself, it doesn't matter how good your photography is. So that's why I don't necessarily listen to what the industry dictates, because they're not paying my bills.
Amen. Yeah, no, it's that challenge, especially, part of the audience of this show is younger photographers that are trying to sort of find their creative voice, trying to find their niche where they fit in the world as a photographer. And so, it's okay to not have to follow the flow of the industry necessarily. Everyone
has to find their own way. It's interesting. 3 of the shooters that work for us are, in their early to mid 20s. And it's always interesting. The one, her and I go at it head to head sometimes because we're very similar people. But ultimately, I would say probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, she'll come back to me and go, I was thinking about this and you were right. And I'm not always right, but there's a level of experience that comes with this. When you've owned a business as long as we have, some of it's luck, some of it is knowledge, some of it is just life. And if you lose something somewhere, you gain it somewhere else. You just can't worry what everybody else thinks about you. And that's, again, social media world, the amount of likes and followers, and that doesn't pay your bills. Sometimes it does, but it really doesn't. At the end of the day, if you look at any of the numbers on our social media, all of our followers I've built up naturally and organically over the years. Do I have as many followers as other photographers? No, but I'm still busy every day, so we're doing something right somewhere.
No, I think you guys are doing a lot right. Being able to follow along what you're doing, I think you're doing a lot right.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so just kind of the last question to sort of touch on before we get into sort of the lightning round of questions is, what does photojournalism mean to you as a photographer? What is sort of visual storytelling for you?
It's interesting. I think people see us as visual. People don't necessarily understand what visual storytelling is. You ever see these memes that are out there, and it's normally like a 4 square where it's like, what my family thinks I do and what my friends think I do. And, I think how everybody looks at that is different. For me, photography and photojournalism, while they're the same, are very different. There are set rules to photojournalism. There are not necessarily set rules to photography. The people that are coming up in the digital age don't necessarily know the difference. And that's why I always say, like, my hashtags on Instagram, I always say photographer, photojournalist. Because while I always follow the rules of photojournalism in some form or fashion, I have more wiggle room as a photographer than I do as a photojournalist. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's hard to remember to take one hat off and put the other one on. I don't know how, this is not new information, but I will say to your listeners, I have no idea how to use Photoshop. I use Lightroom only or Photomechanic, and that's it. Those are the only 2 programs I know how to use. I couldn't really edit and add to an image if I wanted to, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Everything is always more, shadow and contrast and burn and dodge and all this crap. So when you hear somebody say, photojournalist, this is what drives me nuts in the private sector. Photojournalistic style. Well, what is that? Photojournalistic style means you're just letting people do their thing and you don't really know what you're doing or how to pose them. So you're just letting them do your own thing. Yeah, it's a style, But it's like when you see people say natural light photographer, that just means you don't know how to use flash. Like and like that's what it comes down to. And granted, we all start out at one point or another. And I'm not making fun of them as much as I'm saying like, these are the words that you hear constantly out there. Oh, we do photojournalism style photography. Yeah, okay, sure. We'll go with that. That's fine. I know the difference. And if I'm shooting something for a paper or I'm shooting something for a magazine or whatever, and it's a very specific, assignment, I know what I can do and what I can't. As opposed to when I'm doing an event and I can mess with people and do what I want to do and still make it look photojournalistic in style, but I'm not bound by the rules of photojournalism. So because I know, like, if we're doing stuff for one of our nonprofit clients and it's it's a gala, like maybe their yearly gala or something like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm shooting for the client and I need to make sure that I'm getting images for them for marketing for the following year and one sheet recaps for their sponsors and all that kind of stuff. So I have to shoot from that standpoint, but I also have to shoot from the standpoint knowing that some of these images are going to go into local magazines and newspapers. So I have to shoot from that vantage point as well. So I'm wearing multiple hats sometimes, and knowing the difference between what I can and can't do based on the situation helps, as opposed to people, and this is why you hear more and more about staged images. People are like, oh, who's going to know the difference? Everybody's going to know the difference. It's going to come out. I mean, it's absolutely going to come out. You can try and hide it as much as you want, but sooner or later, the truth will come out. And you know why? Because there are cameras everywhere, and people are taking pictures with their cell phones of stuff that, no, this was a natural event. Well, the cell phone picture says differently. So which one's true? And people are trying to get away with it, but it always comes home to roost, always.
And that's a really good point that I think a lot of maybe younger photographers might not think about. That's like, all right, let's say you edited a photo and altered it in some way, and you might not know that, hey, this X nonprofit client or X corporate client that you just shot the event for, well, hey, they might submit those to a magazine or a newspaper, and then all of a sudden it's on you for altering that image.
Absolutely. When we work with our nonprofit clients, one of the things that I generally will take the lead on is if they're dealing with magazines or newspapers who want it after, because I'm going to send them directly, because then I can find out what format do you need it in. Mm-hmm. We can talk about different things, and I can find out whether, they need slugs included or not. And, that helps me do my job on game days. Do I need to take notes? Do I need to write down who these people are so I can put it into the slug? Like, all these things come into play. Mm-hmm. But again, that's a lot of years of knowledge and getting knocked down on my ass a few times, not knowing the difference. So, you can never comes back to what we started the show with. You can never do enough prep. It's always good to do as much due diligence before a shoot as possible, so you don't run into these situations.
Well, BP, I cannot thank you enough for all of this great wisdom that you've been imparting to us along the way.
I don't know how great it is, but I appreciate it.
It's better than you'd think. So the next thing we are going to do to wrap up our conversation is a quick lightning round of questions. We'll let people know where they can find you online, and then wrap it up for today.
Got it. All right. I'm ready.
What's the one thing in your bag that you'd never leave home without?
Extra batteries.
Ooh, that sounds like somebody who has been there and needed them.
Well, and especially, I think I told you I'm leaving for this cardboard classic tomorrow, and it's up on a ski hill. It only takes one time of not realizing that you didn't charge your batteries, or you didn't have a charger with you, or to keep them warm in your pockets as opposed to in the camera bag. You only need to make that mistake once.
Exactly. All right. What's the most important thing you've said no to in your career?
The most important thing I've said no to is giving up copyrights without compensation. And what's the other thing? Knowing when you're undervalued. That's the biggest. We have turned away clients and to financial hardship for a little bit, but you have to know what you're worth and you have to know what you bring to the table and know that it's okay to walk away from it. I do that on the regular basis. I absolutely do that. Sometimes it's okay to say no, and I do it regularly, and sometimes it hurts, and sometimes you get that gut feeling where it's like, a PIA charge is not going to be enough for this client. Like it's better just to say no.
Mm-hmm. That's the spirit. All right. What do you do outside of photography that recharges you?
My wife and I are huge wine people, so we're out in Sonoma, Napa, a good amount. I'm a cigar aficionado. I love a good cigar. So at least once or twice a week, I will spend time with my friends at the cigar lounge locally. I have lunch with two of my oldest friends every week, sometimes twice. And I enjoy actually just getting in my car and driving. I'll get in my car and drive for 3 hours. I'll have the camera with me just in case, but it clears my head. And I've been doing it since I had a driver's license. It's just something that works.
I love it. And that's a good note for all the younger photojournalists and things. Always, always, always have your camera with you.
Yes. Never leave home without it.
Exactly. What advice would you give to a student graduating from university today about a career in photography?
First off, stop putting pictures of yourself up on your Instagram page. Nobody cares. I mean that sincerely. Like, stop taking pictures of yourself and your food. Like, if you want to be taken seriously as a photographer or a photojournalist, put other people up on your pages, unless it's your own personal Instagram. But as far as graduating today, and there are no small jobs. And I learned this is something that I brought with me from radio when I first started as an intern, and this was advice that had been imparted to me. You say yes to everything that's asked of you when you first start, because you know nothing. You're out of school, and there's so much that they don't teach you in school, so you would never know how to do most of these things. Like, you just wouldn't, you would never have a clue. Mm-hmm. So, for me, that will always be the biggest thing. Is somebody asks you to do something, you do it. Don't say, let them do, because guess what? I have seen people that have started out both in radio and photojournalism that have said no to so many different things that it doesn't take long. It's a small industry. It doesn't take long for stuff to get tossed around about you. Good photographer, but they're lazy. So it's really important. And plus, if you do a little bit of everybody's job, it helps you down the line. It may not help you right away. Going and getting somebody's coffee or going and doing, the grunt work that nobody wants to do. Yeah, it sucks, but you learn how to do it. And when you know how to do everybody's job, you become almost indispensable, because this is a person that we know that we can go to, we can count on. And guess what? When that first big assignment comes up, you're going to be the first one that they think of, not this other person that happens maybe is a better shooter than you. So,
well, perfect answer there. So finally, where can people see some more of your work and connect with you and Chorus online?
So chorusphotography.com, that's CHORUS photography.com. On Twitter, I'll be honest, I don't tweet a bunch. I normally just push it out from my Instagram, because nobody really cares what a photojournalist or photographer has to say. They just want to see the pictures. But we're at Chorus Photog on Twitter. Instagram, we are Chorus_photography. And on Facebook, we are Chorus Photography. And if anybody ever wants to email or get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me through our website. Again, it's chorusphotography.com. I'm a huge proponent of mentorship. So if you've got questions, if you're not sure about something, I will always return an email. I will always return a phone call. I always have time for our industry people, because, it goes back to the same thing. We're all we got. So we need to have each other's backs.
That is super generous, and I really appreciate that. And people, you should take him up on this. He knows what he's doing.
Most days.
There we go. All right, BP, thanks for coming on the Photo Forward podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. It was a great time.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to today's amazing episode with the one and only BP Miller. That's at Chorus_photography on Instagram. You should definitely go check him out online and give him a follow. As we mentioned in the intro to today's episode, if you've got a question or anything you want to ask on the show that I'll respond to AMA style, I've set up a page at photoforward.media/connect Or feel free to send an email or voice message to connect@photoforward.media, and we'll tackle those Q&As in some upcoming episodes. Enjoying listening to the Photo Forward podcast? Want to hear more thought-provoking, engaging discussions about photography, creativity, or freelance business? Well, this is where you come in. We want to get the word out as wide as possible about Photo Forward and reach as many listeners as possible. And the best way to do that is through reviews and recommendations on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you consume your podcasts. If you want to support more engaging and intimate conversations with photographers, cinematographers, and storytellers the world over, head on over to the Photo Forward page and drop a review to let me know how you all are enjoying the show, or even just a rating. It means a ton to growing the show, and I personally read through each and every review to make the show the best damn visual storytelling podcast out there. Thanks for listening, everyone, and as always, keep seeing, keep thinking, and keep putting your best photo forward. Catch you all in the next one.